through the windows of the Lutheran confessions, it really, my goodness, it just gave oxygen to the brain, gave relief to my soul because they were rightly attached to justification by faith alone.
Flame, thank you for being with us today.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's fair to say that you're probably not as well known here in Australia as you may be to American watchers and listeners. So perhaps to begin with, if you're happy just to give us a bit of a snapshot, just briefly, of who you are and where you live and what you do.
Yes, indeed. Well, my given name is Marcus Gray. My artist name is Flame. I am originally from the United States, particularly St. Louis, Missouri. So born and raised there. I grew up in the inner city, in the hood, whatever you want to call it. But I was, raised and reared to be a Christian. Also, the sort of context I grew up in was the hip hop rap context. So as a kid, I just observed culture through the lens of a hip hopper. So it just really informed how I thought about life and all matters of what it means to be a person, to be a human. And while at the same time, I was sort of in this tug of war with my faith, but also wanting to be cool and fit into the natural flow of, my environment. So for that reason, I got involved in rapping, which is just stands for rhythm and poetry, for those who may not know that. And yeah, through a series of events, took my faith more seriously, started to rap about Jesus, Christianity, and unpacking those things over music. And it led me to traveling the world and speaking and writing, as you mentioned. So that's kind of a snapshot of who I am.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Thank you. And so you're known now as a Lutheran rapper, I think we can say. But I'm aware that this is that you've had quite a Christian journey, and that's something that'd be good to hear about a little bit today. Perhaps you can tell us, before you became a Lutheran, what were the kinds of church and Christian environments you were raised and formed in?
Yes. So primarily, I would just say I was influenced by just generic evangelicalism, maybe no particular bents in one way or the other, but mostly couched in just, yeah, again, probably yeah, just sort of general way in which people talk about Christianity. And then when I took my faith more seriously, I moved into a denomination called Full Gospel Baptist. And it is a blend of Pentecostals and Baptists. So they came together, formed this denomination. So in that way, I was exposed to some, good foundational principles related to the faith, the Trinity, Jesus being fully man and fully God, the virgin birth, Jesus rose bodily. Those things were impressed upon us as kids. But then there was this Pentecostal leaning and sensitivity that emphasized, sort of this charismatic expression of Christianity, where there's these loud, boisterous responses to God's word and looking for prophecies, looking for healings, expecting to be made rich. Those kind of things were blended in my church experience. But then as I sort of became exhausted, led to despair from the pitfalls of that type of thinking, then I moved to the Reformed space, particularly the Reformed Baptist. So it's a version of Calvinism that found its way in my life through the influence of other Christian rappers. So I really leaned into it. In some ways, I feel like it rescued me and pointed me in the right direction to think more deeper about my faith, to consider some things related to church history. And I camped out there for 18 years. But there were unfortunate ideas from that camp that began to bear down on me. Just briefly, one idea was this sort of notion that Jesus did not die for everyone without exception, that he, in fact, created some people for heaven and created others for eternal damnation. So after, 18 years of sort of living in that type of world, hoping that I was one of the ones Jesus died for, trying to bear enough fruit to prove not only to God, but to myself that I'm one of those special people, just taking an honest look at myself and my progress or lack thereof in certain areas, I just became gravely discouraged. And right in that funk, in that sort of low spot, is when a close friend of mine, randomly it seemed, introduced me to confessional thought. And the story is just history after that.
Yeah, well, I look forward to hearing more about that. I'm really, really curious about the yeah, how significant your Christian rap was through this process. And you said that this was part of what kind of led you at first towards the Reformed kind of camp. And I think, here in Australia, probably people don't know as much about hip hop culture generally, but what they do know is not necessarily the Christian world. So, our big football code here, the grand final is coming up, like the Super Bowl, and Snoop Dogg is coming as the halftime show performer. Would you believe? But can you tell us a little bit about how significant is the Christian hip hop culture and rap scene in America?
My goodness. It's so, in American Christianity, people talk a lot about these sort of movements earlier on. They call them revivals or great awakenings. And I would say if we're using that line of thinking, then you must put Cross Movement, which is a group that, really laid the foundation for Christian rap today. I would say you would have to put them and Christian rap in that through line of these sort of energetic moments within American culture where Christians became very passionate about outreach, making an impact with non Christians, and trying to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, if you're using that as a grid and a way of thinking, I would definitely say Christian rap belongs in that conversation because it was just a group of inner city guys who got a hold of Reformed thought, Calvinism, and they used it in the arts to teach. And most of them had gone to Bible college, seminary, and they were trained particularly with reform thinking, and they just, infiltrated the hip hop space with that type of doctrine and articulation of Christianity. And my goodness, it spread all throughout the United States, all throughout America, overseas even. They began to do missionary work and to disciple other artists on how to navigate the music industry while also thinking about your faith in a serious way. So it became just this huge phenomenon that continues to linger even to today. So for that reason, I think it's a good contribution. But I would say the dominant voice in it for sure, the predominant voice would be Reformed thought. And so I think this is healthy for us to talk about Christian rap, but also to maybe encourage them to continue on. I think it was a step in the right direction, but let's not settle where we settled. Let's continue to see what the Holy Spirit has taught His church throughout the ages, and see if we may have missed something along the way.
Mm. So let's talk a little bit about the journey towards Lutheranism then, out of first that more Pentecostal church environment through Reformed Baptist and some of your struggles there. So what you mentioned it was a friend that first introduced you to this world of confessional Lutheranism, I think. So tell us a little bit more about that. What prompted the journey?
Yeah. So, like I said, so on a personal level, I was feeling, discouraged. I was constantly giving myself over to demonstrating to God that I was very pious. I was very sincere. So if I needed to sacrifice things, if I needed to form more intense levels of accountability, if I needed to read my Bible more regularly, pray longer hours, I would. I had given myself to this deep sense of piety, but I constantly felt empty, constantly felt like I was falling short and that it just wasn't enough. And sort of in that desperation, I get a phone call from one of my close friends who was a student at a Reformed Baptist seminary at the time. And he mentioned to me that one of his favorite professors who taught a church history course, who was a Baptist professor, he said to him, he says, "Hey, if you're going to continue your studies and you're from St. Louis, I recommend you check out a school by the name of Concordia Seminary in your hometown, St. Louis, because I think you'll get great training there related to church history." So my friend calls me with that conversation as I was in that sort of mood, in that sort of funk, that low place. And he just mentioned it to me like, "Hey, Flame, I know you're considering going back to seminary. If you do consider going back to seminary, make sure you check out Concordia Seminary St. Louis." And I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. Thank you, that kind of thing. And then I called the school. I scheduled a time to tour the campus. And that date rolled around. I got a chance to just sort of explore the school grounds with one of the professors there, Dr. Gerhard Bodie. And the whole time I'm talking his head off about John Calvin, how John Calvin saved Christianity. And it was just hilarious because I didn't process that it was a Lutheran school. And he was just humoring me, just kind of letting me express myself and not be, sort of dismissive. But then he did burst my bubble. He said, well, you do know this is a Lutheran school, right? This is a Lutheran institution. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Because at the time I'm thinking John Calvin, Martin Luther, same
Mm,
person, just a different
mm,
base. And
mm,
so longer story short, I had to test into the master's program. And while I was studying the materials, that's when I noticed that there were significant differences in how they articulated things like justification by faith, things like baptism, things like the Lord's Supper. So that intrigued me. I was scared, if I'm honest. I prayed, Lord, please don't let me join a cult, guard my
mm,
mind, guard my conscience. And I thought, I'll just eat the meat and throw away the bones, as they say. I'll just
mm,
go here and get this healthy articulation of justification by faith alone. The other stuff I'll just dismiss. But
mm.
obviously, God's Holy Spirit had other plans. And so, yeah, I tested into the program. And I literally, no exaggeration, I didn't say much on campus. I didn't make mention of myself as Flame. I didn't
Mhm.
ask questions. My thing was just sit and soak. So every class, I would record every lecture on my cell phone, and I would, on the way home, I would listen to each lecture again. So it's like I did school double time. I would listen to it
Mhm.
again, and I became obsessed with just walking through slowly everything that was being said, and it was really filling my heart and giving me hope.
So one of the things that we have in common is that I also studied at Concordia St. Louis, and I haven't mentioned yet that Flame, you tell this whole story in your book, Extranos, and I really enjoyed the book. And I actually listened to the audio version, which I'll talk a little bit about perhaps in a few minutes. But as you're describing this trip around the seminary, it was just so lovely and charming to listen to as one who's been there and knows these professors. And I could just imagine Dr. Bodie sort of quietly nodding and smiling along and letting someone go on this, but then correcting when the time came as well. And you speak very warmly about your professors there as well and how they mentored you, had space for questions and all of that. So I gather that some key people at Concordia Seminary St. Louis were fairly influential in this journey.
My goodness. My goodness. I feel so indebted, so to speak, to these gentlemen. I regularly thank God for their care, their vocation to teach, to instruct. I haven't gotten over it. I feel like I'm still in that moment. And so recently I had a chance to visit the campus and record a few interviews with some of my favorites. With Dr. Bodie, we got a chance to sit down, which was so lovely for me because I haven't seen him since I graduated, and which was in 2018. So it was just such a powerful moment to see him again and to revisit and just kind of share my heart with him in a way that I wasn't able to before because I was really learning then, as I'm still learning now, but it was very fresh. So I was able to just say thank you to him. Dr. Joel Bierman, another gentleman who I mostly credit with helping me with this sort of conversion because at the time,
Mm,
the curriculum at the school did not include a class on Reformed thought or Calvinism. For whatever reason, that particular quarter, it wasn't a part of the curriculum. And then the rest of my time there, I was there for 2 years. So he was intentional, however, to keep that as a part of his talk, as a part of his lectures, contrasting early, Reformation, Lutheran Reformation to later expressions of it, whether it's Calvin's or the Anabaptist radical version. So, my goodness, I'm so thankful for Dr. Bierman and Dr. Leopoldo Sanchez, another one of those gentlemen that really impacted me. And I'll say the other gentlemen really would be Dr. Maxwell, Dr. Okamoto, and Dr. Aaron. These gentlemen and Dr. Alowski too. So
mhm.
I feel so grateful for those gentlemen, and yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I get to kind of relive that. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, me too. And I mean, it's amazing to be at a place like that where, you can walk across to morning coffee or whatever and just talk to these guys, and they've always got time for you, time for your questions, time for working through things. And I was thinking about that as I was, it's very interesting to hear of someone's kind of spiritual formative journey taking place in parallel with an academic one, which is, just interesting to hear how that all happened. And so a bit more about that then, and what you, I guess, found in Lutheranism that helped you spiritually. I'm really interested about this, and your book brings this out very, very strongly. It's a very interesting sort of book, by the way, and maybe I'll just ask about that first, actually, because I don't know what I was quite expecting, but I've never read anything quite like it in terms of, it seems to me to be a blend of an autobiography, but then also, I would say something of there's a lot of teaching in it, right? You really unpack the scriptures and Lutheran doctrine in quite some depth, and there's also an element of, polemic would be too negative, but you are defending the Lutheran expression of the faith over against, other confessions. And so, yeah, I'm just interested in what sort of book it is as well, and how that came about, and how it's been received.
Yeah, you know what? Thank you. That's a high compliment. I'm humbled by that. I feel like I don't know how to categorize it myself,
Mm.
but one of the things I was really sort of particularly focused on was that blend, because when I read theological books, oftentimes I'm always curious about what the writer was thinking, what led him to
Mm.
this particular point. And even when I read figures from church history, I get lost in the concepts, but I wish I can ask questions to the author, like, man, I wonder, if I could talk to, Martin Chemnitz about this statement. Like, why did you say it like this? So I kind of get into that. So when I approached the book, I was like, I want to give that component in this book. I want people to sort of feel like it's a conversation between themselves and myself as I'm unpacking these ideas. So I wanted to incorporate that. And I didn't know if it would translate, but that's so encouraging to hear that it did, because I think that today people value authenticity. Now, I think there can be a problem as well sometimes when you value authenticity in a way that's rude and mean. But I also can see a positive aspect of it where people want to know, is this true for you? Like, really? Is
Mm.
this really impacting you? Are these ideas really useful? How do they apply on a ground level on a mundane Saturday afternoon? What does it have to do with me? So I think about those kind of things when I approach writing. It's just most people are really simple and they want to know, how does this help me? How will this impact me? So I try to bring that to the writing process, you know?
Yeah, no, I think you did that well, and it makes me think of another comment from a CSL professor, Professor Kolb, who says something like all theology is biography or something like this. And his point is that, all theology comes out of a context and out of somebody's story. And as you say, you often don't know what it is, and you've got to go to other sources and kind of work, this is what was happening at the time. There was a world war on or something, and that obviously impacted how they think about things. But this is really threaded through your book in an interesting way. And it also just makes it easier to read, by the way, because you get to read a bit of story and biography, and then the kind of, as I said, it's not light in terms of teaching, though. You really unpack Lutheran doctrine in some depth. So I commend that to people who haven't read it.
Awesome.
Now,
Yeah,
in
thank you.
terms of the content of the
Yeah.
book, though, one of the things that certainly comes out strongly is the importance that the sacraments had for you in your journey. So can you talk about why that is?
Yes. So for me, coming from the Reformed Baptist world, and also just generic evangelicalism, the sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper, are exclusively talked about as mere symbols. They're just sort of visual aids that depict what Jesus did a long time ago. Baptism is just an outward sign of an inward change. It's your first act of obedience, they would say. It's your time to signal to God and to the world how serious you are about your faith. And if you were a Christian and you started to live a licentious life and you are now ready to return back to Jesus, they would even say you should get baptized again and rededicate yourself, and show the world again that you're now ready, you're renewed, you're refreshed. So that's how I understood baptism. The Lord's Supper was, again, just another one of those moments in the church service where you take some time to think about what Jesus did on the cross, and this wafer and grape juice, or this cracker and grape juice, reminds you of he died for your sins. And in that moment, you're just contemplating yet again. So Christianity is sort of relegated to your thinking, to your mind, and just reflect, think again, refresh, and think again. So for me, the sacraments were a work. They weren't really central. Maybe we would do the communion once every 6 months, if that. Baptisms were, kind of, maybe they would happen, maybe not. But in understanding these sweet teachings in a way that they've always been adored and cherished, through the windows of the Lutheran confessions, it really, my goodness, it just gave oxygen to the brain, gave relief to my soul, because they were rightly attached to justification by faith alone. Something that I already confessed. I would say amen to Paul in Romans 5:1 and 2, that we are justified by faith and not works. But to understand that, God delivers that same justification in our baptism, and he marks us as his children, as his sons, as his daughters. He puts his triune name on us. My goodness, he gives us a good conscience. As we're struggling along the way, we can rest in the reality that we are good with Jesus. We are on his good side. When we're tempted with sin, we can remember, you know what, maybe I should say no to this, because I am now the baptized. I shouldn't just do whatever my desires would want me to do. And all these things were tied to justification, which expanded it for me. The Lord's Supper, I regularly return to the Lord's table and receive Christ in the bread and wine, this mystical union that escapes my ability to fully grasp. But there, Christ moves inside of me and brings forgiveness and reassures my faith, strengthens my faith, gives me immortality, unites me with my brothers and sisters in the room and all across the world, and even those who are with the Lord. And it became this expanded understanding of God's grace, his care, his patience, his love, in a way that I needed, because as I was constantly looking within, because I was trained by Jonathan Edwards in his book, Religious Affections, where he's teaching you to consider heavily your affections, your thoughts, your motivations, making sure those things are very pure and that they align with God's. So I'm trying to synchronize with God in this fine-tuned way that he would see, and then some kind of way bless me. And that's exhausting when you're constantly looking within. And especially if you're like an introverted personality like myself, I already spend much time in my head. I can already get into the weeds of a thing and beat myself to death. And that just became a terrible exercise for me. But Lutheranism, through a proper articulation of the sacraments, took me out of that sort of deep gaze in my heart and helped me look at Christ and what he's done for me. So it made me look up instead of looking in or looking down,
Yeah. That's and your book is called, your first book was called, that details this journey, was called Extra Nos, which for people who aren't aware is just means outside of oneself. And the sacraments, I gather, are a big part of this. I'm interested in your comment there about that kind of Puritan Jonathan Edwards history and your own introversion. And also, I think there's something about our cultural kind of time, and that kind of makes this a bit of a perfect storm, because there's also this cultural kind of push to find who you are, be your own inner sense of expression, and all of this. Do you have any sense of to what degree this was a huge thing for you because of your Christian background, or your temperament, the way God's made you, or the cultural pressures around? Because I see this same kind of thing everywhere, and I'm just curious about whether it's like, do you think this is a common problem in those church circles you were in before, or how do those things interact?
Yeah, man, perfect storm. Perfect storm. It is certainly interesting that in mainstream society, you're right, I agree. There's this push for looking within to find your true self or to find the goddess or the god within. To look to go on these deep dives for your authentic self. Now there's, a lot of talk about therapy and counseling, which also can be healthy, but it could also be a practice in revisiting your past, reflecting on your childhood. So, in many ways, that's the spirit of the day. The call is to find healing by revisiting the past, to find wholeness by doing some type of deep seated, no, some deep search for those deep seated issues within. And so if you take just that cultural norm and expectation as the pathway to wholeness, to fullness, to happiness, to hope, and then you add that to an articulation of the faith that says, that's nearly right, except do that for God. So now you add this other burden on top of that that says, and God is expecting that too. He wants you to go to stay in there, but to do it for God. And when you find the darkness in your own heart, confess it. Confess that you are a filthy sinner, that you deserve nothing. And you sort of get into this strange practice of celebrating how bad you are, and you look for those things, and that's the evidence that you're really humble. That's the evidence that you hate your sin and you love Jesus. So stay in there, keep digging around for how bad you are, and in that is your liberation. So that became the way my friends and I would talk. We would have regular conversation about how sinful we were, how terrible we are, how easily we like to make idols out of things in the creation. So now we start to have this view of the world that is mostly a dangerous place. So you go to the beach one day, you see the beautiful waves, you see the birds flying around, and you say, man, this is beautiful, but my God is more beautiful. This doesn't mean anything to me because compared to God, he's more beautiful than his creation. I worship the creator more than his creation. So you start to have this sort of skewed lens by which you see the world, and it's sad. It really is sad. And it's not that there's no truth in it, but it's
Mm.
the skin of the truth stuffed with a lie, which in effect makes it difficult to embrace the sacraments because you're so used to viewing creation as bad, as negative. It's just so barbaric to think God would use something that's minuscule as water or bread and wine. No, those things are your attempts to idolize creation again. Come back to this focus of looking within and improving on your affections, and that shows God how sincere you are. So that cycle, my goodness, it was draining and exhausting. And I think the mainstream world needs help to come out of it. And I think even a lot of our Christian brothers and sisters need help to come out of it. So I see our vocation in the confessional Lutheran space, at least one of them, is to come alongside of our brothers and sisters and help them breathe, help them relax and have hope in the gospel. So in that way, I thank God for what's been preserved here. And people need us. They need us.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think one of the services you do for Lutherans as well is just to remind them not to take this aspect of our faith for granted. That sometimes in an effort to kind of fit in with the broader Protestant world, we can be tempted to downplay these very things that you're talking about, which are just such a treasure in our tradition. And I've seen this again and again with people coming into Lutheran church from outside. They kind of have that idea, like you expressed earlier, that these Lutherans are kind of just like the rest of us, but they do a few funny kind of Catholic looking things. But then when they hit the sacraments, they just had no idea how serious, how this is just a central part of the Lutheran confession of faith. And yeah, so this came out very strongly in your book. I really appreciated it, and I think it's a great place for people to go just to get a good articulation of that in a very interesting way. One of the joys, by the way, of listening to the audio book was that Flame actually reads it himself, and also raps as part of it. And so, if you want to hear a bit of that interspersed within his reading of the book, that came out quite nicely as well. Another thing that comes out strongly in the book is the importance of good works being for the neighbor. You talk quite a bit about this. And I'm wondering if you can tell us why that was important in your journey.
Yeah, that's great that you would highlight that because that was another one of those concepts that was so pivotal for me. So I'll tell a short story. I remember while I was on campus at Concordia Seminary, and this this was the first time that it got out that Flame was on campus. I guess a few of the students had known my music, and so it got to one of the professors, and so one of the professors made a statement, because they conveyed it back to me later, and they were sharing with him who I was and that I was a Christian rapper, and the professor said, "He's a what?" And they were like, "He's a Christian rapper." And to which he replied, "I guess he doesn't like money then." So when they told me that, it could have been an insult, but it was the most freeing and liberating concept for me at the time because I wanted to know, how did he get there? How how was me being a Christian rapper not the punchline, not the impressive thing that showed my sacrifice where I resisted rapping for my own personal reasons, and I chose to rap for God, almost like this monastic decision to leave mainstream society and join a monastery and become a monk. Isn't this more impressive? And the professor is just like, I guess he doesn't like money then. Why would he limit himself, so to speak? So I was like, I became obsessed with understanding, how did he get there? What books is he reading? What lectures is he giving? Or did he receive where he feels so liberated to talk that way? So I started to chase that down, and I found out through class that it was this doctrine of vocation,
Hmm.
because I came from the world where I decided to be a Christian rapper. And because that's the thing that's valued, is what you do for God. I'm sure people have heard people say, only what you do for Jesus will last. That's like a popular saying here. So it communicates that as you're living life as a Christian, what God is after is to see what level of sacrifice you will, offer him. In what ways will you stay away from mainstream society? Don't go to the mall. Don't hang out with the non-Christians at the movie theater. Isolate. Stay away. Don't be a rapper that just raps about good things. Rap about the Bible. So there's this culture here, this expectation to do good works for God. So you're always trying to send up to heaven these sacrifices, these hard decisions up to God to say, "Are you pleased now? Did you see that, God?" You want to get caught cleaning up, and you hope God is like taking notes, like, "Wow, I'm impressed. He chose to stay in and wash dishes for his grandmother instead of playing football with his friends. Wow, that's really my," and that's the kind of thinking that I was, trained and discipled in. But this notion of vocation, where God is actively caring for his world using non-Christians and Christians, but it's beautiful when Christians are in many ways caring for others with this awareness that we are created by God, that we're justified by his son, and we lean into that and we trust in that forgiveness Jesus brought by faith. So now as I serve others, I am not doing it out of this sort of reaction or compulsion, this obligation to impress God, but I'm doing it because my neighbor needs my help. They're struggling over there. They need a kind word. They need whatever service I offer them. If I'm a son, if I'm a husband, if I'm an employer, an employee, whatever the thing is, if I do it to the best of my ability, I do it well for their relief, to help them as they struggle along the way. That's a good thing. And God is answering prayers. He's caring for others through us. So go hard after good works, not to impress God or to remain in his good graces, but to fill the earth with good. Because in that sort of dynamic, it's like he's using the good wherever it is, like breadcrumbs that lead up to these big gospel moments. And God is just filling the world with good. And when people follow the good, oftentimes they get these Christian conversations about their creator, who sent his son Jesus to care for them. And it all makes sense then. Then they start to reflect on how good God has been. They start to be thankful for their grandmother and the school they went to and the lady that helped them at the grocery store. And it all starts to lead up to, wow, God is a good God. He does love us. I want to be on his good side through his son Jesus. So we play our part in that type of dynamic when we just do good for the sake of neighbor. And if I can talk ahead of one more time, it reminds me of there's a Psalm chapter 50, verse 12, where God says, he says, the earth and its fullness are mine. He says, if I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine. So God doesn't have any needs. And if he did have a need, he wouldn't tell us. He would just go get some Chick-fil-A on his own. Why would he tell you? He owns everything, so to speak. So in that way, it just helps me to not feel like I have to do stuff for God. I need to do it for my neighbor as unto the Lord. He's glorified as I lose myself in caring for others. And so liberating, so liberating.
Yeah. And really helpful to hear that was a part of your journey, because occasionally you get people kind of coming into Lutheranism, and the baby almost gets thrown out with the bathwater in terms of the sanctified life and good works. There's such a relief from perhaps a legalistic world they've come out of, but whereas it's very clear what happened in yours is that the good works were redirected in a healthy way and the focus shifted, but it wasn't that they weren't important. You
Yeah,
mentioned that
100%.
this funny line about being a Christian rapper, not wanting to make money. I am interested in your move from. I mean, you're very self-consciously a Lutheran rapper now. If a person goes and reads your lyrics, it's you're unashamedly confessing Lutheran doctrine through your lyrics. I imagine, if I was to guess, in the United States, that the Lutheran rap scene is not as big as the Reformed space, and so, to say the least. And so, how has that part of your career been, moving from one to the other? I imagine, that would have had its difficulties, and maybe, I don't know, were invitations to concerts and conferences harder to come by, or how's that journey been?
Yeah, great question. So I do remember when I released my first project articulating these ideas, titled Extra Nos, the same title as the book. At first, there was stunned silence. A lot of my fellow friends and fellow artists and pastors were just silent. They didn't have a negative response. They just didn't respond at all. And I didn't quite understand how to interpret it. I think I may have been like Luther in a sense of, I just thought everybody would happily celebrate these ideas and, we would all move forward. So I was a bit shocked by the silence. But then it went from silence to inquiry, where people were, just like, man, I never heard this articulation. I've never heard Christianity talked about this way. So it wasn't as much resistance as it was a sort of ignorance to these concepts, and I'm using the term in the best way. People just didn't know. They hadn't heard
Mm.
these things. Many were college professors. Many, I don't want to exaggerate, a couple of people that I'm thinking about were deans of, reform schools. So lay leaders and lay people alike were all saying, we just haven't heard this before, which I was shocked because I'm like, man, many
Mm.
of my friends are in theological education. Many of them have master's degrees, bachelor's, PhDs even. And to hear them say, I've just never heard Christianity articulated that way, I said, wow. So that was that. But then in terms of everything else, I think I had already established an audience that expected from me theological engagement. So I think there was a curiosity that sort of sustained me. People were still peering in to see what was being said, what was being going on. And then, I would say I did feel the distance. Certain places that would have brought me out before may not have, asked me to return. But I don't think it was malicious as much as Flame just has a different confession. And
Mm.
I respect those kind of things. I wouldn't expect you to bring me out There would be no bitterness there. But what I have witnessed is there's been more curiosity than not. And many
Mm,
people they'll bring me out, but they'll bring me out with a caveat. This is our brother in the Lord, our Lutheran brother kind of thing, to use humor to kind of lighten it. And they would
mm,
just sort of instruct people to enjoy what there is to enjoy. We know flame and that kind of thing. So in that way, God has sustained me and allowed that curiosity and those bonds that were made and formed in my previous circle, I think extended beyond our differences because we just friends, we're just brothers in the Lord, and I would like to think they know my heart and my intentions. Um, I share with one of my friends, there was a point where we were lockstep critiquing unhealthy expressions of Armenian thought or charismatic thought. So, in some ways, you should see me as doing more of the same. It just so happens that, you may be on the other side of this articulation. That kind of, and they would say, yeah, you're right. You're pretty much being the same person you've been. So, in that
mm.
ways, relationships have really helped me sustain.
Do you know any other Lutheran rappers?
Woo! That's so funny you asked me that. Okay, so I can't say too much now. But
Mm,
what I will say is there's something exciting that has happened. And I will be making an announcement very soon because one of the things that I prayed about was, man, Lord, I don't want this to seem like a novel thing. And even if it is, I don't want it to stay that way. So I would love for you to excite within other creatives a desire to articulate our confessions through rap music. And I would just like to celebrate that
mm.
God has been kind in that way. So stay tuned for
We
an
look forward
announcement
to,
soon.
yeah, look forward to hearing that. Um,
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
so you had this huge change in confession and finding the freedom of the pure gospel and the life of the sacramental life in the Lutheran Church. You also then tell the story of actually attending a Lutheran church for the first time, which is I think a fairly common kind of challenge that people face these days when often people kind of come across Lutheran um, doctrine online and have never met a Lutheran in the wild, so to speak. But your version of this story is just classic. I was laughing out loud as I listened to this because you talk about just fumbling with a hymnal, for example, and trying to you'd never come across how one line goes to the other and down, and just couldn't get your head around this, and it was just quite amusing and very relatable. But I guess I mentioned that just to ask more generally, what other kind of more cultural challenges were there for you coming into the Lutheran Church, having been sold on the doctrine, so to speak?
Yeah, man, that is so funny. Yeah, those are the true stories. Um, but I would say beyond that, now disclaimer, coming from the full gospel Baptist space that I was mostly reared in as a teenager, I then moved to the reform space, which is
Mm,
sort of similar. So
mm,
it's predominantly white as opposed to diverse or predominantly black. So in that way, I got a lot of those. I guess the confrontation of that distinction or difference in that circle. So by the time I moved into the Lutheran space, I had already sort of lost some expectation of Christianity being tailored to my style of humor, the way I see the world, and my skin color, and that kind of thing. So I'd already sort of had a healthy dose of becoming a hybrid, so to speak. And so yeah, but it was definitely noticeable. There was predominantly Germanic, Scandinavian, Norwegian brothers and sisters. The style of liturgy was unique. There would be this thing called confession and absolution at the beginning of the service, which was a thing that I would have mostly associated with Rome. But Lutherans put a more healthy biblical spin on it that I think is right to do. Um, and then so that was something I had to adjust to. I had to think about, man, how will this impact people that I want to bring into this space? Will they feel comfortable if they didn't have that sort of season to adjust like I did in a reform
Mm.
world, how would that impact them? So all those things became really relevant, and I started to process. But the primary thing that has anchored me is realizing that we're in Christ. We are all one. There's no slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile, male, female. We're one in Christ, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. So what I began to celebrate was God gave me an opportunity to really feel that and to lean into that. As I could have chosen to feel odd and different, I chose to experience it as this is what God was talking about in Ephesians 4 and 5,
Mm.
what Paul had wrote with the Holy Spirit inspired. So I leaned into it in that way. And in that way, it makes it kind of fun. You can laugh at the differences. You can have spirited conversation with others about it. And it makes it much more lighthearted. And then when I bring other people into the space, I would like to think I'm establishing the kind of change I want to see. And for people that are just freaked out looking at vestments and the style of liturgy, I tell them just lean into it, enjoy it as an experience. And this isn't the way forward, but a lot of people are still skeptical. So I'm just like, just visit maybe once a month. You're scared right now, you're freaked out. Well, just come to a confessional Lutheran church once a month. Go to your normal place of worship until you grow a sensitivity and a comfortability, to find out this is not a threat. These are your brothers and sisters, fellow sinners and saints like yourself. And so many people have appreciated that approach, sort of like a middle ground, a transitional way to move
Mm.
into a scene that is a bit uncomfortable and to sort of feel it and to own it and let it sort of wash over you, that kind of thing. So that's been
Yeah.
that's been a fun thing to try to navigate and coach people through.
Yeah, I mean, and again, good for us, more lifelong Lutherans, again, just to be aware of these kinds of challenges that people face, and that there's people that are really drawn to Lutheran teaching, and yet just the cultural challenges of coming into the life of a congregation can be just that. And so it was helpful for me to read your your impressions and just think about how you help people kind of find their way in and be practical about that. The last thing I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you about in relation to the book was there's and this was I didn't quite expect this emphasis was on the church fathers. So this comes up quite a bit, and this I gather leads into what's been your next book, which you may want to mention as well. But why was that emphasis on quotations and ideas from the early church important as part of your journey?
My goodness. That was pivotal for me because one of my fear was that I was potentially joining a cult. And
Hmm.
in my mind, what that meant was I'm buying into some new thing, some novel spin-off that's unhealthy. So I was afraid of that. But I felt the draw. I felt like I was being pulled in, but I would resist it because I felt like, man, this is a new articulation and newer isn't always better. So that was my fear. And that fear was relaxed as I heard Dr. Aaron talk about, church history and how it was important for Luther to root his claims in the things the church has always said. Because even for Luther, that was a concern. He didn't want to seem like some new thing that was this cool thing that was, a deviation from historic Christianity. His goal wasn't to divide the church, but to show that the things that he was saying was consistent with what the church has always articulated. And for me, that became personal because it touched my own fear in that way. But then also, just contextually as a Black American, there was this sort of parallel movement at the time that was attacking mainstream Christianity, and it's a group called Hebrew Israelites, and they gained some momentum because of the social unrest in our country, particularly 2020 and 2021, and because Black Christians were sort of fragile in trying to understand this dynamic of what was going on in society, trying to understand how white brothers and sisters were responding or not responding. It was a vulnerable spot. And then the Hebrew Israelites came into that vulnerable place and said, come over here. This is the true articulation of God's way. This is what the Bible really means. And they started to, sort of pull people into apostasy. So for me, finding out that the church fathers had things to say long before colonialism, Christianity is not the white man's religion as they would try to convince black people of, black and brown people of, that many of those early church fathers were African, North African also. And in that way, these ideas were handled, preserved, and protected not only from brothers and sisters from the eastern part of the world or Europe, but also from the continent of Africa. That was very important for me to hear, and it was just in multiple ways helped me to not resist God or to resist his word, but to find comfort in that this is not new at all. In fact, it's old. It's the most ancient way to understand Christianity, and in that way it gave me a peace to follow God's word wherever it would lead.
Very interesting. And so I understand your next book then really picks this up and runs with it, which I have not read yet. Can you just tell us about that briefly?
Yes. So the next book is titled Because Jesus Taught It: Christianity Through the Eyes of the Church Fathers. And this book was important to write because once the first book was released and music in between the first release of my first project and now people became more curious about the church fathers. They became more interested in understanding this way of talking about baptism, the Lord's Supper, and even good works. So they became very curious, and this book was an attempt to scratch that itch, particularly because I have a song titled The Patristics. And in a song, I'm just running through a bunch of those early church fathers and even a few after those first 3 centuries who talked about baptism in the way that Luther talked about in the confessional Lutherans articulate. And people said, man, Flame, is there a way we can know more about certain personalities, certain people? So that book really just answers that type of call. And it's been a great response so far. And I'm happy that a lot of pastors have gotten a hold of the book, and many of whom have so many cool stories. I can't even share all of them now, but I'm thinking about at least 2 right now who, have been convinced of these ideas and have taken responsible steps towards stepping down from being pastors in their reform spaces. And, again, all done with wisdom and not in haste. These gentlemen have been, upfront and honest with the elder board, and, the churches have respected their decisions, and they've just sort of walked down their responsibilities there. And these 2 gentlemen I'm thinking about are now training in seminary, being catechized in a confessional way, according to ancient Christianity. So those are just 2 stories among many that I could share of real change happening on the ground because people are celebrating the freedom of the gospel. They're celebrating good works being directed towards neighbor as unto the Lord, as opposed to impressing God, standing his good graces. And in that way, it's just an exciting time, and I'm thankful that God is using this type of effort to those ends.
Mm. So you've written a couple of books, and you've been a student and a Christian rapper for many years now. What's on the horizon for Flame or Marcus Gray?
Yes, indeed. So getting through the PhD program, that's what I'm working through now. As one of my professors would say, he would say, suffer well. So, so I'm going through that process. Also, I am, I got this cool announcement that will highlight, other acts and bring up, younger artists to carry these things on as well. And continuing to write music, continuing to travel and to speak. And that's really cool. And I'm happy that God is still giving me a place in these denominations outside of ours where they're still open to this conversation. So a lot of cool things are
Mm.
happening behind the scenes. A lot of, great conversation with groups of pastors. They just want to sit and talk. Can we just ask questions and pray afterwards? So those types of things are happening on the ground. And just continuing to build into that and see what God has in mind.
Have you ever been to Australia?
I have. It was years ago. Let me see. I want to say 2014. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a while ago. I need to get back.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to come back?
Yes. Oh
Yeah.
my
Okay.
goodness.
Well,
Yes, I would love to. So it's a long flight, but it's worth it.
it
It's
is.
worth it. It's gorgeous there. It's a lot to see for sure.
It is. It is.
Oh,
Yeah. So
I
you,
remember when I was there. I'm sorry, I was gonna say. I remember that the teams kept telling me to taste something called Vegemite, and they were like, "You have to taste it. It's amazing." And I'm like, "Okay, I guess." And then yeah, it was an experience.
it's not quite suited to the American palate, let's say.
That's true. I just tasted it and smiled. I just tasted it and smiled.
Yeah, that's right. When I first traveled overseas, the tour guide told me, just keep in mind whatever you encounter, it's not wrong, it's just different. A bit relativistic perhaps, but it helps. Yeah. Uh, Flame, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate you sharing a bit of your journey with us, and God's richest blessings on your future and all that you do. And we hope we might see you down in Australia one day.
Yes, yes, indeed. Thank you, my friend. This was fun. This was encouraging, and I appreciate the invite. Yes,
Yes, no worries. All right. God bless you.
yes, indeed.